I'm on a mission to finally go back and finish Radiant Dawn after my child self gave up 15 years ago. This is my second video in the series, so watch the other one if you missed part 1. Or don't. Maybe you really just like Radiant Dawn part 2. I'm not judging. Following the events of the first major story arc, we leave the Dawn Brigade behind, including all of the characters I was getting really attached to. The game swaps its perspective westward to Crimea, which is also the name of a real-life geographical location which has been in an ongoing tug-of-war between Russia, Ukraine, and independence, which makes me feel like I need some kind of disclaimer before I make a video about civil war in an entirely unrelated video game Crimea. Crimea is a country currently having a collective panic attack over the liberation of Dayan, since the new king's dad was responsible for the Mad King's War a few years ago, which was an invasion of Crimea that very nearly succeeded until Ike showed up and Iked all over them. The new Queen Alincia has taken the political stance that war is bad, and her political rivals in court hate her for it. They resent her for not occupying Dayan after the war and for recognizing the validity of their new monarch. Instead of immediately starting War 2, we did another one. The endless string of snippy, passive-aggressive comments from a horde of angry men is remarkably similar to what it's like to get into a political discussion on Twitter. Wait, they call this something else now. Queen Alincia abandons the castle in order to touch grass, and her friend Marcia shows up to give her a pep talk, reminding her that she's actually doing a good job as a compassionate ruler, but everyone is using her as a target for their collective anxieties about the future of Dayan. In what appears to be a random excuse to make the gameplay start before more story occurs, a bunch of foreign soldiers have crossed the border in search of hot blonde women in their area. They want to capture and sell Princess Leanne to line their own pockets, and don't seem to mind invading a foreign country in order to do so. They're not even from Dayan. This chapter has nothing to do with the overarching plot of Part 2, which is a bit of a waste because Part 2 is already pretty small, and while Alincia is ostensibly the main character of Part 2, this is one of 2 chapters where she's playable. Yeah, there's 5 chapters in Part 2, and they're told from, like, 4 different perspectives. It's a bit disjointed. Instead of telling the Bennion Draconites to piss off and maybe not cause an international incident, Alincia pretends that she isn't the queen, so she has an excuse to fight them herself. Ignore the old raven shouting Queen Alincia out loud while surrounded by the enemy soldiers. Somehow they didn't hear him, even though we did. Despite Alincia's bravado and overall high stats, she forgot to bring an actual weapon, boldly brandishing a 2-might sword presumably made from foam. Marcia is okay by virtue of being properly armed, and Nialuchi is a reasonably strong crutch unit that vanishes for 15 chapters after the conclusion of Part 2. The prologue chapter's map is just a giant square full of dragons in which none of your units particularly gain any experience. Marcia gets a little, but her overall availability throughout the game is a little awkward, so I don't care about funneling experience into any long-term projects right now. As it turns out, having Alincia heal your units unequips her sword and forces her to bonk the enemy with her healing staff, which does almost as much damage as her slim sword. I aim to aggressively route the map of wyverns because sitting in a corner defending for 8 turns is boring, and that's how I learned that the entire map charges your position once you draw aggro from the boss. I pull back to the north while picking off enemies one by one, keeping Leanne out of danger and using her to grant my allies more turns. Nialuchi runs out of birdseed and transforms back into a human with wings, so I had him whisk away Leanne in the corner while I desperately try to stop the boss from running him down. Coming to reinforce me is the best unit in the game, Har, a man who retired from the military to become a UPS guy. Har promptly delivers this guy's soul straight to hell, and I fence in the boss on 3 sides to make him stop moving. Why didn't he just fly up? Is he stupid? Once Har finishes off the boss, the map just, keeps going? No, there aren't any enemy reinforcements, not even on hard mode. I just had to keep defending for 2 more turns. Did nobody designing this map realize you could kill all the enemies? Leanne came to Crimea in search of Ike, who has since gone missing. Alincia offers to let her stay as a royal guest while she staples lost dog posters to all of the utility poles in Crimea. Letting Laguz stay in the royal court angers Alincia's political rivals. Despite that line from the ending of FE9 that said Crimea would never forget the debt they owe to the Laguz for helping liberate their country, I guess they forgot. In fact, everyone hates Alencia so much now that even random farmers are getting pissed off. Give the girl a break. In Chapter 2-1, we immediately abandon our brand new army and change perspectives yet again to another, completely new selection of units. A revolution is brewing in a small farming village where some of the veterans of FE9 live. Some greasy dude in armor is giving a speech blaming the Queen for how Crimea suffered during a war which she did not start, in which she was not queen, and also she won. Nephany drags Braum to the town square and crashes the speech to call everybody complete lunatics, and Greaseboy accuses them of being royal spies that will burn down the village if word gets out about the upcoming revolution. Don't mind the fact that Braum and Nephany live here and probably would not want to burn down their own house. In fact, people in this crowd recognize Nephany, but they still decide to trust the crazy guy they just met over the girl they literally grew up with, the same girl who happens to be a war hero. This conflict feels kind of forced, but here we go. There's a side objective to not kill the villagers that just joined the rebel army, something that's difficult to know without being told since all enemies are named Rebel, and the bit that says Volunteer on 4 of them is buried under a submenu. Also, you spawn right next to one and they're super weak, so good luck not killing them. Some girl in a Naruto headband shows up to start stealing from the villagers. I guess that makes her my ally for some reason because the rebel army immediately starts attacking her before she's even done anything. I bring Nephany over for a chat and Heather has a gay panic and immediately joins my army because she thinks Nephany is cute. Which, like, same, honestly. That would work on me as well. For some reason, bandits show up and start destroying villages at random. Are they with the rebels? The rebels aren't attacking the bandits the same way they went after Heather. Is the rebel army blaming Alencia for destroying the country while actively destroying the country? Heather looted an item called the Spectre card, which lets non-magical units utilize magical damage, except it does like 4 damage. Since Heather has a higher magic stat than Nephany, I let her try it out instead, which goes even worse. You also can't double or crit while using it. I don't know what the point of this item is. I spent most of the map training up Nephany by giving her the majority of kills. I want a unit to focus on, and she tickles the same funny bone that Edward does because she also has Wrath, and I like watching critical hit animations. With the chapter complete, Nephany and Braum decide to leave the village and warn Alencia about the rebels, who are raising an army in protest of her tyrannical policies such as lowering taxes and caring for orphans. In order to prevent the growing rebellion from erupting into a full-blown civil war, Alencia's advisor slash spymaster slash kind of sister offers to dig up dirt on Duke Ludwig, the mastermind behind the rebellion. We finally get access to base camp for the first time, and there seems to be stray cats in the unit screen who joined my army before their first appearance in the story. Our current army is under the command of Lucia, our third main character so far. She was barely in the last game, so it's nice that she shows up a bit earlier this time. I hope I'll get to use her more this time around. Lucia stops by to ask Braum and Neph to accompany her on her espionage mission. The resulting conversation is funnier than any joke I could come up with. She also enlists the help of the Laguz, some of which join without her consent. I don't know why only 2 of the 4 Laguz present are listed in my army back at base camp, given that all 4 are present in the next chapter. Lucia heads over to meet Duke Ludwig, our antagonist for the arc, in order to search for evidence of the rebellion, which she immediately finds in a cave just outside the castle she's staying at. The gameplay of Chapter 2-2 is Lucia's escape from said cave as Ludwig's guards approach and block the only exit. Because it's dark, we can't see very far, so I have to find enemies the hard way. This is annoying because humans like Nephany can only see 2 tiles, and I don't have a torch. Thieves and cats can see further, but it's still only 4 tiles, which means it's easy to get unexpectedly attacked by enemies from outside of your sight range, like this archer that shot through Nephany and killed Leanne, giving me a game over. Also, your turn ends if you bonk into an enemy in the dark, and Old Man Nialucci can see a remarkable 1 tile into the darkness. Get this man some reading classes. By pushing to the north, I'm able to lure the offending archer from last time to strike Braum, and I obtain a torch I can give the Heather to extend my sight to a usable distance. My goal is to slowly creep forward while feeding as many kills as possible to Nephanie. As someone who lives in this general area, I think it's cute when she says y'all, and I've decided to become obsessed with her. I have Nialuchi hold a choke point so an unexpected enemy doesn't come finish off my wounded Nephanie, upon which he takes 53 damage from some sort of invisible shadow monster and instantly dies. Because Radiant Dawn has a firm respect for the elderly, losing Nialuchi results in a game over. I am a little bit peeved that both birds are game over on deaf units in a Fog of War map that hides crossbows in the dark which have 72 might versus flyers. I would be more sympathetic to calling this a skill issue on my end if lighting a torch helped you see further than 5 tiles out when the enemy archers threaten you from 7 tiles away. I start the map over for a third time, feeding Nephanie multiple level ups while utilizing my trial and error knowledge to lure out specific threats and eliminate them safely. With the entire map cleared out, Nephanie finishes off the boss and gets one more excellent level up for the road. Having retrieved sufficient evidence to legally indict Duke Ludwig for starting an insurrection, Lucia returns home to find that Ludwig has now openly declared civil war. So much for espionage. Alencia authorizes the Royal Knights to engage Ludwig's forces, but she gets really depressed about having to put her own people to the sword. This sort of character development could be really good if I got to play the game from Alencia's perspective, but she's in less than half the chapters during her own story arc, so it doesn't get enough time to grow. We once again abandon every single playable unit we've had up until this point for an entirely new set of 6 units, led by the 4th main character of the arc, Joffrey, Lucia's younger brother and leader of the Crimean Royal Knights. Is it too much to ask for a unit I can use for longer than 2 consecutive chapters? I want Nephanie back. There is a crowded base conversation that attempts to rapid-fire introduce some of the characters that are getting crammed into Part 2, all of which are veterans from the previous game, except Devdin has been replaced by some completely unrelated guy called Danbed. Chapter 2-3 gives you 6 playable units and a dozen cannon fodder NPCs, throwing you at incredibly dense packs of weak, low-level enemies that don't particularly give any experience. The horde of red and yellow units takes a super long time to go through their turns, and I find myself spending more time looking at my phone rather than playing Fire Emblem. You actually get a healthy amount of bonus experience for each red unit left alive by the end of the map, so I tried to use my yellow allies as bait, sacrificing them to the mob while I sneak up the right side of the map. This didn't work very well because the NPC knights were too powerful and killed most of them without my support. The top half of the chapter is more interesting as the stronger promoted enemies actually grant experience, but the 3 enemy catapults are really annoying, slapping my units for 2 damage at a time while playing lengthy animations every single turn. It turns out they do double damage when they choose to directly target a unit, something that didn't happen until I put Astrid in range of all 3 catapults. Even funnier, I didn't notice that one of the archers had a longbow and Marcia got obliterated as well. My attempt to leave some of the enemies alive in order to get bonus experience for Nephanie has resulted in the slaughter of all of the unnamed Royal Knights, as well as 2 of my playable characters. So, worth it. More blood for Nephanie. Also, I don't want to restart the chapter because I didn't find it to be very fun. The game tried to make me restart anyway because Joffrey got double crit by the boss, which was horrifying. Duke Ludwig is nowhere to be found, having used his weaker men as sacrificial bait so he could lead his best troops to the Crimean capital, while Joffrey and the Royal Knights were busy conquering his castle. Having hidden Queen Alencia outside the capital, Lucia sneaks out to do some secret spy stuff to confirm Alencia's status and immediately gets jump-scared by Ludwig. I can't help but feel like this scene was missing some extra flunkies. Lucia could have just left. What's he gonna do, chase her down while wearing a full set of armor? Ludwig is not only seemingly alone, his army isn't here right now. Just walk out. You can leave! Anyway, Lucia got captured. Ludwig threatens Alencia by chopping off Lucia's hair and mailing it to her like some kind of serial killer, which drives Alencia to personally take command of the Royal Knights. Most of the units from Part 2 return to my army, minus Joffrey's squadron, and I finally initiate my master plan, Nef maxing. I start by giving her all of the stat boosting items I've gotten so far, capping 2 of her stats, and I pump in all of the bonus experience I've accumulated over the last 4 chapters, capping her speed and forcing the game to assign her several consecutive strength gains in its attempt to raise 3 stats per level up despite her growing number of stat caps, turning her into an absolute monster of a unit. The rebel army suddenly arrives and immediately storms inside because a man on the inside left a gate open on purpose, accusing Alencia of being a weak ruler who is bowing down to Daeon. I don't know why every NPC keeps accusing her of doing this. She defeated Daeon in the war 3 years ago. She hasn't even spoken with Daeon's new king. I can easily swallow the explanation that the entrenched nobility were disrupted by her sudden coronation and would want power for themselves, but it's getting beyond absurd that every other servant and farmer in the land has nothing but hatred for Alencia after the epilogue of FE9 was uplifting and cheery regarding the reconstruction of post-war Crimea. I really don't like being overly negative, but I find it hard to mask how bitter Part 2 makes me feel because of how much I absolutely love the story of FE9, and it hurts to see the cast of the first game treated as an enemy by their own country which they worked so hard to save. Crimea wouldn't even exist right now if they hadn't won the war. Alencia's Gambit is often cited as one of the great maps in the series because it's an exciting, large-scale climax that rewards aggressive play, giving you opportunities to get good items deep into the map. However, this map really isn't my style, as you can just stall it out using one-tile choke points, or have Har one-round the boss with a hammer on turn 2 and end the chapter prematurely. I split my army into 2 equal halves, Nefany on one side and everyone else on the other. I quickly run into the same problem as the previous chapter. The high enemy density on top of the large number of allied yellow units results in very long enemy turns that leave me staring at my phone while waiting to play the game. Most of my army doesn't take part in the action since Nefany can solo one half of the map and Har can solo the other. I start to get bored, so I send Har on an adventure, aiming to fully rout the enemy force instead of just defending. Meanwhile, Nefany eliminated around 24 enemies by herself, wiping out the entire left flank and completely running out of stuff to kill. By the time Joffrey's squadron finally shows up in the corner of the map, Har has already begun to clean up all of the enemies they could feasibly help with. Having defeated dozens upon dozens of enemies, I finally stray within range of the boss, who I didn't realize would charge you when you get close. Having already spent over an hour on this chapter, I give up on the idea of fully clearing the enemies and just bonk Ludwig on the head with a hammer. With Ludwig defeated and imprisoned, the rebel army has scattered and fled the scene. Moments later, a messenger informs Alencia that the remaining rebels are using Lucia as a bargaining chip to negotiate the release of Ludwig, having somehow already set up an impromptu gallows and assembled a crowd of random civilians within bowshot of the fort's walls. Did nobody pay attention to them doing this? Alencia storms down to the dungeon to ask Ludwig what the hell is wrong with him, upon which he blames her for not preventing the civil war that he started. Quite fed up by this point, Alencia refuses to negotiate, calling out Ludwig on his hypocrisy and how his facade of fighting for the supposed greater good of Crimea is just a mask for his ambition that doesn't spare a thought for the lives of his countrymen or the men under his command. Standing proudly, Alencia announces that she will not be releasing Duke Ludwig, a moment of firm conviction that Lucia is willing to die for as she proudly praises her queen. Standing stoically as Lucia faces down her final moments, we get a very nice pre-rendered cutscene that features considerably low-budget voice acting.
I'm nervous. What have I hit her?
Arriving in the nick of time, Ike finally shows up to his own game to rescue Lucia, bringing his mercenaries with him, which unfortunately comes with more voice acting.
Sorry. Always last in your books.
The Grial mercenaries go to town on the rebels, while Lucia has suffered a mysterious fainting spell despite the fact that the rebels didn't actually get around to hanging her, and she was completely alert the moment before she fell a few feet and was caught by Ike. It's like she has some sort of sudden onset damsel in distress syndrome. Alencia reunites with Ike and warns him of the rumors surrounding the recent liberation of Daeon and the role the Black Knight played in its final battle. This is concerning news for Ike because he holds a deep grudge against the Burger King for killing his dad in the last game, and Ike was reasonably sure that the BK died when an entire castle fell down on his head 3 years ago. With that ominous threat out of the way, the story just ends. Yeah, right there. That's part 2, we're done. The game immediately cuts to a movie trailer for the next story arc. I feel like they could have used more of an epilogue. Would it be funny if my video also ended as suddenly? Oh, hey. I'm gonna keep making more of these, so if you want to see me play the rest of the game, subscribe to be notified of my next video. Either way, thank you for watching until the end. I really do hope to see you in the next one. Cheers.